And really, as pilots, we're taught this from the very beginning during our primary flight training days from a forecast standpoint, that we look to that terminal aerodrome forecast, the TAF, when determining weather around a particular airport. And the TAF is great. It's very useful, and we use it every time, but it's really constrained if you think about it. It has to follow the same format of the winds, the visibility, the cloud coverage, and that's good, but it doesn't really give the big picture of what's going on around the airport and what the meteorologist was thinking. I'm sure many times they probably are frustrated and want to get more information in there to pilots, but they physically can't due to, which is good, the limiting size of the TAF. So something I want to bring your attention to, and in this example and throughout here, we're gonna use ForeFlight as our example model here for the app. Again, everything we're going to show is available on the Aviation Weather Center website. But again, being ForeFlight is probably the most commonly used aviation application out there, and they do a good job of pulling in these resources. We're going to use this as our template. But if you look there on the Airports tab, here we are looking at Plattsburgh International in New York, and we're on the weather section, and we see the familiar METAR, TAF, MOS, MOS. We're going to talk about that here in a minute also. But we're on the Forecast Discussion tab. And this is something you really should make part of your briefing, whether you're a private pilot, instrument pilot, etc. And what this is developed for various regions around the country, roughly the size of a large city, sometimes larger based on population and the size of the state. But it's basically what the meteorologist and the forecaster was thinking when they developed that forecast for that airport. And it gives you a sense of their confidence level, which I think is really important. This time of year, we see the common symbol in a TAF, which is VCSH, showers in the vicinity. That's great. That kind of says, okay, be aware, but that doesn't really tell you a whole lot. Sometimes that evolves into severe thunderstorms. Sometimes it evolves into a light rain shower with 10,000-foot ceilings. Not a lot of information there about what that means. But what you can see here by reading these forecast discussions is the forecaster basically wrote what they were thinking when they developed that TAF forecast. And especially in areas that you're not too familiar with, maybe that have some terrain influences out west or near coastal regions, say California, if you're not used to flying in those areas, they have predictable weather patterns, and the forecaster will bring those in and kind of explain why he thinks the conditions exist the way they are and what the likelihood of them changing throughout the forecast period is. So check that out there in ForeFlight during your next self-weather briefing. The same tool here, we're looking at the Aviation Weather Center website. Again, we're on the aviation forecast discussion, and that map there of the United States shows the grids of how they are broken up. So you can see there are several forecast regions per state, and you can click on any one of those to view that aviation forecast discussion and get that additional information. It's going to take a little practice if you're not using these now, and a little bit of training to work your mind into thinking that way, but it really is helpful, and you'll learn a lot about the weather along the way as to what's causing the certain conditions that you're seeing. Okay, Scott talked a lot before about the model output statistics. On the left side there is the raw data, that blue grid of numbers and letters and symbols that is output by these computers. And as he mentioned, these are computer-based forecasts. There's no human intervention here, but they are beyond models. They take historical data and use statistical information to improve those forecast information. From a pilot perspective, this is great in addition because they're available for over 2,000 airports throughout the United States. Many know who fly in rural areas outside of the bigger cities. The TAF forecasts are only available for those larger airports. So you don't really have that hour-by-hour forecast when you're out in the country or out away from the big metropolitan areas. And that, in my opinion, from an aviation standpoint, is where the MOS forecast can really come in handy to give you some of that TAF-like guidance in less populated areas. Now again, we're looking at ForeFlight in the weather tab there. Under the TAF button, you see the MOS button. And it's going to be a very similar layout to what you'd expect with that TAF, with the wind forecast, visibility, clouds. These will go out to 3 days in the future. My experience, beyond about a day, they kind of get a little run. You know, they're not too accurate from compared to what a human forecaster is going to tell you, but it can give you a feel again for long-term trends. If you're looking a couple days out, you might be able to gather some guidance on the trends of what's going on. But for that shorter term period, it's another tool to look at and compare to the TAF to see how they line up for your flight that day. Now, the Aviation Weather Center also creates several graphical depictions of some of the data that the MOS outputs. And again, here we're looking at for flight. Now we've jumped over to the imagery tab. If you look at the left-hand screen here, the imagery tab contains a lot of dedicated individual weather forecast products that tend to get overlooked, but a lot of what I'm going to discuss this evening is going to be based on what's in this imagery tab that I want you to start incorporating into a weather briefing. If you call Lido's flight service or do a graphical weather briefing through ForeFlight, you're probably not going to see a lot of these. The standard weather briefing hasn't really changed much over the last 15 years and has not incorporated some of these model output statistics and other forecast data. And a big part of that too is some of these are long-range forecasts. So what we're looking at here is a ceiling forecast that goes out to 84 hours based on that model activity and information. And what this allows you to do is look 2-3 days down the road to see what's going to happen around the United States. And what you're looking at here are the black areas, which are the parts of the country that don't have any of the color information on there. In this case, that means basically ceilings above 12,000 feet for this forecast period, which is labeled up here at the top in Zulu time, all the way down to the darker yellows and oranges, which shows ceilings in the 200 to 400 foot range. You're not going to use this as an IFR pilot necessarily to pick your airport for your instrument approach or make very narrow decisions, but again, a good long-range planning tool that can help you get a feel for how things are shaping up over the next few days. Along the same lines, the chart looks very similar. This is actually a visibility chart now. Again, if you look over here on the left-hand side of the imagery tab, we're looking at the visibility forecast. Again, this goes out to 84 hours. But a great tool for private pilots, VFR pilots flying in good weather days to get a feel for what the long-term visibility forecast is again too. And then your code here is at the bottom. So this black area, obviously the middle parts of the country, over 6 miles visibility forecast, but these colored regions here are predicting down to the 0.5 to 1 mile visibility range in the days ahead. So a good tool there. For those not using ForeFlight, all this information is also available on the web. I put the URL, the website there, which is pretty long and not exactly an easy one to memorize. But if you go into any web browser and search for the GFS MOS graphics, you'll pull this web page up here. And you'll see along the left-hand side, it'll break out other products as well based on that statistical model forecast, temperature, precipitation, thunderstorms, etc. And what you may even find, you might start using this to predict plan your weekend out if you want to go golfing, or maybe not an aviation weekend, but you might use it for just to see what the weather's like over the next couple days. So a really helpful tool there, again, based on that long range model data.